Welcome to Emtron Training Part 58. In this training tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at working with our shift cut feature. Our shift cut allows us to make full throttle shifts, whether we're going to be on a synchro transmission, a dog box transmission, or a sequential transmission. We can implement things such as a clutch switch, a strain gauge, or a shift switch, whether we're upshifting or downshifting. We can integrate all of this into the Emtron to signify that we want to make a full throttle shift and have a power cut when we're making that shift happen, so we can reduce the drivetrain stress and strain on our transmission and other components in the drivetrain. It's actually relatively simple to set up. We're going to be taking a look at a couple different examples here so you know how to go and configure all of the various inputs in order to implement the shift cut on a variety of different transmission types. We're going to have a lot to cover. Let's jump in so we can check this out. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with our gear cut programming within our Emtron ECU. Our gear cut allows us to interrupt the power production of our engine under full throttle conditions so that we can make a gear change happen without worrying about or having risk of damaging the transmission, whether it's a sequential transmission, a dog box transmission, or a synchro style transmission. Now we have a variety of different ways we can implement working with our gear change or gear cut feature in the Emtron. We can work with a clutch switch, we can work with upshift, downshift switches typically found on older sequential transmissions, or we can work with a strain gauge, which measures the shift force that we're putting into the shift knob or the shift lever to determine when we want that shift cut to happen. We're going to go over all the different examples here in the tutorial and discuss how to program things properly. It's actually relatively simple to set up and configure, but we need to know a lot of details in order to do that. The first example I want to take a look at here is the most basic example, using a clutch switch. So this would be if you have a dog box transmission, if you don't have a strain gauge or a load cell shift knob installed on your vehicle, and or if you have a synchro style transmission where you just simply want to have it interrupt when you're making your shifts happen doing a full throttle shift. We can use a basic clutch switch. All we need to have is the clutch switch and just two wires wired into the clutch switch in order to make this work, and then programming all the features here into the Emtron to initiate the gear cut when we're going in and clutching in as the vehicle is actually making the gear change happen. There's some programming things that we need to cover in here. Let's jump in and take a look. So the first thing we need to do is go from our tuning area here and jump into the config area. Under config, we're going to go to channels, input setup. Under input setup here, under our switches, we have a clutch switch. Now we've already set this up in a previous tutorial. Let's take a look at how to do this just so we're covering all of our bases here so we understand how the clutch switch setup and configuration is going to work. So double clicking on our clutch switch. In this case, I've wired my clutch switch into analog 11. Now in this case, I've set my input settings to a switched input. That's what I'm dealing with here. Now my particular clutch switch is wired in a way so that one wire of the clutch switch goes to the chassis ground on the vehicle. The other wire that's going to be going into the ECU pin, in this case it's going to be the analog input 11. Now in this situation, when I clutch in, I'm sending a direct ground path from chassis ground into my pin A11. So in this case, I have a falling style signal that I'm sending into the Emtron. So in the active edge here, I'm going to choose falling as my option. If I chose to wire the clutch switch with its two wires, one wire going to 12 volt and the other wire going into analog 11, then I would choose my option as rising. Now taking a look here, I have the pull up here enabled. I need the pull up enabled when I'm using a falling style signal or a ground input into my particular analog or digital input. Now we could use analog or digital. I'm using analog here just the way I have this configured and wired. If you're sending a 12 volt in, if you're sending a rising signal in, then we would turn the pull up off. We do not need the pull up on when we're sending something like a 5 volt or a 12 volt signal into the Emtron. So in this case, I have it switched input, falling because I'm sending a ground into the analog input 11, and then I have a pull up on because I am grounding that pin, and it needs to have that internal circuitry set up so that's going to recognize that ground on that pin. Now, the next thing here is going to go into the arming thresholds. We want to go and designate where we want it to turn on and where we want it to turn off. So in this case, because I'm grounding my pin, the voltage will go from 5 volt down to 0. So in this case, we're going to say it's going to turn on when the voltage is less than 2 volts. Now we can actually test this. If we take a look down here, we can see under the config main in my lower panel here, I'm taking a look at my analog voltage 11. Now in this case, it's showing here about 4.95 volts. If I go in and simply clutch in on my vehicle here, we're going to see it goes to 0 volts. So it recognizes that switch is on or off, essentially, and we're setting our conditions here. So on, it's telling the particular clutch switch here that the way we're setting this, it's telling it to turn on below 2 volts. It's telling it to turn off when we're greater than 3 volts. So we can see right now I'm off the clutch switch. It's approximately 5 volt here. Going back on the clutch switch, it goes to 0 volt, and now my thresholds here should be met. Now I can check the condition of this, the status of what's going on with this. If I go to utilities, if I go to ECU runtimes, and if I'm looking here under my various inputs, we actually can take a look in my Motorsport 2 window, which we're going to have to take a look at for the gear cut parameters or statuses, just so we can see what's going on here. We can actually look over here to gear shift control. If we're looking under clutch switch, we can see that this status is going from off to on when I'm clutching on and off. So we see it's recognizing that as the clutch switch being activated. So we know that the programming details have been covered here in the input configuration setup for the clutch switch. Now we're ready to move into taking a look at how to program some additional things in order. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.